Hey everyone, Heero here, and today we're gonna look at Sunna, a support that provides decent buffs while also being able to deal high off-field damage. I'll be discussing her kit, builds, wenjins, and possible teams. Just as a quick disclaimer though, the footage and information that will be shown is from the creator experience server, so things can still change when her banner drops. Let's start by discussing her special attack, which is a fairly standard special that deals damage, but the more important thing is that it summons Bubblegum, who we'll talk about later. But let's move on to her first EX special, Bubblegum Barrage, which is essentially a stronger version of her normal special while also doing a few important things. First of all, it summons Bubblegum while also triggering a quick assist. However, the most important part is that it also activates the Angelic Coordination buff for 40 seconds. This buff gives all party members an attack buff equal to 30% of Sunna's max attack, with it giving a maximum 1050 attack buff, allowing her to give up to 1100 attack when combined with her Ether Veil. But it's very important to note that you'll need 3500 out of battle initial attack to get the full buff. However, also related to this buff is her second EX special, Photography Technique, which can only be used if Sunna is in the Angelic Coordination state, and is activated by either pressing special while she's in the state or by holding the special button while using an EX special Bubblegum Barrage. Just note, it can only be used once per Angelic Coordination activation, triggers a quick assist, and it also has a unique joint animation when used with Arya. But aside from this, it also activates her special Ether Veil, Delusion Reprise, which, like I said earlier, gives 50 attack, putting her total attack buff at 1100. However, besides this, it also has two special uses. The first of which is that it's able to charge Shunguang's Qingming Sword Force stacks. The second of which is it generates claw sharpening stacks for Sunna every time it's activated. Of course, this brings us to her off-field basic attack, Naughty Cat Spotted. However, there are quite a few things to note about this attack. First of all, it requires Sunna to have at least one claw sharpener stack to use, with you gaining 2 every time any Ether Veil is activated, 6 from Sunna's ult, and 2 from anomaly triggers. But you can only get stacks from anomalies once every 10 seconds. And finally, you can only use it when no enemy has the Cat's Gaze debuff. And this attack's primary purpose is to re-inflict said debuff over and over again right after it's consumed. But what is Cat's Gaze? Well, it's indicated by this cat icon on enemies, and it's inflicted by Sunna's off-field basics, ult, EX specials, and chain attack. It lasts for 12 seconds, with the duration being constantly refreshed while Sunna is on field, and as a fun Easter egg, it also causes enemies to attack her less. But more importantly, it gives her access to a very unique AoE coordinated attack, also called Cat's Gaze, that has very unique mechanics. First of all, it requires more than one attack from an anomaly or attack agent to activate it, but the amount of attacks required gets way lower during stuns. Specifically, it requires 3 attacks out of stun and 1 attack during stuns. Second, triggering it will immediately remove Cat's Gaze on enemies, which is where her off-field attacks come into play in order to immediately refresh it. Third, it copies the element of the on-field agent that triggered it, but sadly, it cannot build anomalies. Fourth, the damage dealt by Cat's Gaze is not treated as Sunna's damage, but instead, it's treated as the damage of the agent that triggered it, meaning it cannot proc wenjin passives like Unfettered Game Ball or Weeping Cradle. And finally, it can only be triggered by an attack or anomaly agent, with it scaling differently depending on the type of agent that triggered it. If it's an attack agent, it scales off 300% attack, while if it's an anomaly agent, it scales off 480% attack instead. It's very important to note, however, that this scales off the stats of the agent that triggered it, not Sunna's. And ability-specific damage bonuses like basic attack damage percent does not affect it. As an example, here's how much damage Cat's Gaze deals with absolutely no buffs active with a fully built Sunna compared to one without any discs or wenjins. And as you can see, there's little to no difference in damage. However, once we do the same for an agent triggering the attack, we start to see some differences in damage, so the better the stats on the active agent, the higher the damage. And another important note is that this attack is guaranteed to crit with a base crit damage value of 150%, and having more crit damage on the unit that activated it will increase its damage. But now let's move on to her ult, which bombards Sunna with unhinged YouTube comments, with it dealing damage, healing, generating 6 claw sharpeners, and it also triggers a quick assist. And finally, for her additional ability, it needs an AOD or attack agent to activate it, and it gives her 15 energy at the start of combat. But aside from this, when her Ether Veil is active, landing an attack on an enemy increases their stun damage multipliers by 30%, and yes, this also works for Shunguang's Veil Vulnerability Multiplier. And finally, for ability prio, level up her core first, then her special, then her ult, then her basics and assists, and finally you can just ignore dodge since you'll never use it anyway. But with her kit out of the way, let's talk about her Mindscapes. Her M1 gives her 15 more energy at the start of combat, while also enabling her Cat's Gaze attacks to now inflict a 40-second stacking 7% def shred. They can stack up to 3 times for a total defense shred of 21%, and each stack does have an independent duration, which of course is insane for boosting team damage, but just note it does cause pan ratio sources to start giving diminishing returns. As for her M2, while Sunna isn't any Ether Veil, every party member gains a 10% attack buff, while Sunna gains 1 claw sharpener stack every 10 seconds. It also reduces the amount of attacks needed to trigger Cat's Gaze, while also increasing its damage multiplier. Overall, the bonus attack is nice, but what makes this Mindscape insane is that it not only increases the frequency of Cat's Gaze, but it also increases its damage multiplier, now having a total of 500% for attack agents and 780% for anomaly agents, meaning it increases Sunna's off-field damage potential massively. While for her M4, it enables Sunna to now give a 60-second damage buff to all party members, which is of course just more team damage, plain and simple. And finally for her M6, it allows Sunna's EX specials to put her in the focus creation state for 8 seconds. This state makes it so all of her attacks are guaranteed to crit, and she gains bonus crit damage based off 0.03% of her attack, up to a max of 105 crit damage. It also increases her anti-interrupt level and reduces damage taken by 40%, but more importantly, it allows Sunna's attacks to now trigger Cat's Gaze that uses the attack agent multipliers. And if Cat's Gaze is triggered while Sunna has claw sharpener stacks, she consumes 1 to immediately refresh it. This is all on top of focus creation also increasing the damage of Cat's Gaze by 50% when any agent triggers it. And with her Mindscapes out of the way, let's talk about her possible Wenjins. Sunna's signature gives 60 energy regen with its main stat, while giving 0.6 more while she's off-field. And whenever Sunna uses an EX special, it gives a party-wide 12.5% stacking damage buff for 40 seconds. This stacks up to 2 times for a total 25% damage buff, all on top of having a refreshable duration. And as an added bonus, when both stacks are active, the team also gains a 10% attack buff. Overall, it's a pretty great option for boosting the entire team's damage. But what makes it even better for Sunna is that it allows her to give a damage percent buff, which her kit currently doesn't have. But despite this, she does have some pretty good and accessible alternatives, with Weeping Cradle being a very decent option. It has a high base attack to help her reach 3500 so much easier. It has a very good energy regen passive to help her spam more EX specials, which is extremely helpful in Shunguang comps. And finally, it has a decent damage buff that you can occasionally take advantage of. And for 4-star options, there is Kaboom the Cannon, allowing her to use her EX specials a bit more often due to its energy regen passive, while also giving her up to a 16% party-wide attack buff just by hitting the enemy with your party. Unfettered Game Ball works too for crit-based teams for bonus crit rate, and Sunna's off-field attack should be able to keep its buff uptime. However, it only works for physical weak content. This is because despite her Cat's Gaze attacks copying the element of the unit that triggered it, it does not count as Sunna's damage. So the only way to proc this Wenjin's passive is with her basic off-field attack, which is only physical. But with possible Wenjins out of the way, let's talk about drive discs. For the 4-piece set, just like every other support, her best set is Moonlight Lullaby for a huge 18% party-wide damage buff and a 20% energy regen that Sunna really likes. Just make sure to use her EX special once every 25 seconds to refresh its effects, and this is pretty much the only set you should consider under normal circumstances. But if you're gonna run her in a double support team that already has a Moonlight Lullaby user, you can use sets like Proto Punk, Swing Jazz, and Astral Voice. Astral Voice in particular is pretty good, especially if you pair her with Astro Yao, since she'll pretty much guarantee the set's uptime even without equipping it herself. As for the 2-piece set, it's pretty simple. If you haven't reached 3.5k attack, or at least not close to it yet, use either Hormone Punk or Astral Voice. But if you've already reached 3,500 attack, just use an ER 2-piece for a bit more energy to ensure you refresh Sunna's claw sharpening stacks as often as possible. But with their possible drive discs out of the way, let's talk about stats. For main stats, you want attack for slot 4, attack for slot 5, and finally ER for slot 6. Fairly simple. And if you're wondering why use ER for slot 6 instead of attack, this is because it's pretty important for Sunna to get her EX specials as often as she can in order to refresh her off-field attacks for more damage. And this is especially the case in Shunguang teams, since more Sunna EX specials means more Qingming Sword Force for Shunguang. As for substats, you guessed it, you can just focus on attack stats since that's all she really needs to function. You can argue that you can give her AP, pen, or crit stats to maximize her damage, but most of Sunna's damage will come from her cat's gaze attacks, which do not scale off her stats. So in my opinion, stats other than attack are more optional than anything. And finally, her only stat goal is 3,500 attack, which shouldn't be too hard to reach since you'll mainly only be focusing on attack stats anyway. With her stats out of the way, let's talk about possible teammates. Well, for teams and synergies, there isn't really too much to say. Sunna, due to the nature of her kit, can pretty much support most anomaly and attacker teams. Anyone can benefit from a 1100 attack buff as well as Sunna's good off-field damage. While yes, her buffs aren't as big and substantial as other supports like Astros or Yuzuha's, she makes up for it with high off-field damage, which becomes even higher when you can trigger it pretty often, especially in longer fights where Cat's Gaze can accumulate a good bit of damage. This of course allows her to act as a substitute if you don't have a team's best supports, and is one of the better options for longer content like Deadly Assault. But with that being said, currently she best supports Shunguang teams due to the many layers of synergies that two have. First, Sunna's Ether Veil allows for faster Qingming Sword Force generation, and when paired with Dialin or Zhao, it allows Shunguang to transform very often. But how fast and how many Qingming Sword Force Sunna can generate all depends on how fast they can get her EX specials back. So again, ER is very important for Sunna, especially in these teams. Aside from this, Sunna also provides a ton of damage boosting effects for Shunguang. Her bonus stun damage multiplier increases Shunguang's Veil vulnerability multiplier, and Sunna's huge attack buff is extremely beneficial to Shunguang since she does want a lot of it. But with that being said, the best Shunguang in Sunna team is one with either Dialin or Zhao. Either one of them can help Sunna get Shunguang's transformation faster. From experience, however, the rate at which you get Shunguang's transformation doesn't have too big of a difference between both teams. They both have high transformation uptime without having to rely too much on Shunguang's special dodges. However, a team with Dialin can easily result in more damage due to her and Sunna's bonus stun multiplier stacking, which helps Shunguang get the full 210 vulnerability multiplier for pretty much the entire battle. And it becomes even more insane once you consider the bonus ults from Dialin. But either Dialin or Zhao alongside Sunna is able to provide substantial buffs while supporting Shunguang just fine in clearing just about any content. Though it's also worth noting that a lot of teams want Dialin, so having another good no Dialin Shunguang team is pretty good. And here is a comparison of the Shunguang teams with Sunna or Dialin or Zhao, with the performance of Shunguang's old best team of Zhao and Dialin included as well to show if adding Sunna was an improvement or not. This was all done on the primordial Nightmare boss in Deadly Assault, and each agent was at M0 while having their signatures. The team with Zhao and Sunna had a 9.67% improvement in terms of performance in Deadly Assault compared to the previous best team, while the one with Dialin had a massive 14.49% improvement. And this is mainly due to ease of use, comfort, and transformation uptime. The teams with Sunna was significantly easier and more comfortable to play while having an almost permanent Shunguang transformation. Whereas with Shunguang's previous best team, there tended to be a lot of transformation downtime due to slower buildup of both Dialin's and Zhao's respective resources. meaning at times, you needed to rely on both Shunguang's EX specials and special dodges to help get her transformation. And messing up said special dodges will cause an even longer downtime, compared to the teams with Sunna, wherein you can get perfectly fine without relying on said special dodges, all due to how fast Sunna can reactivate her ether veils. Which of course significantly lowers the skill level required to play the team effectively and comfortably. But again, this is heavily reliant on having as much ER on her as possible. But moving on, as for other attacker teams, you can also run her in teams like Seed, Evelyn, Harumasa, S11, Ellen, and more. Like I said, she fits in just about any attacker team since any unit can benefit from her utility. While yes, she may not be the best support in some teams, she can act as an alternative or as a side grade option for some of them if you don't have Astra. As for anomaly teams, it's the same thing. She can act as a support in your regular disorder teams like Alice, Miyabi, Grace, and more. But one thing to note is that without Arya, you cannot activate Sunna's additional ability in this team. However, it's not really too detrimental since anomaly comps can be played perfectly fine without stuns or her bonus stun damage multiplier. But it's very important to note that she is not the best support for these teams, and Yuzuha is undoubtedly still the best due to her tailor-made anomaly benefits. However, if you don't have Yuzuha, Sunna can act as a decent alternative until you get her. But with that being said, Yuzuha is also rerunning during the patch, so if you're looking for an anomaly-specific support, just roll for her instead. Of course, things might be a bit different for Arya since Sunna might be her best in slot support. And they also have a faction animation, so there is a good chance they'll work well together. But sadly, the combo still needs testing since Arya isn't up yet in the CE server. The only teams I wouldn't really recommend to run Sunna on is Rupture teams due to multiple reasons. First, no Rupture team can activate her additional ability. Second, she only gives 330 sheer force. And finally, Rupture units can't activate Sunna's Cat's Gaze. So overall, Rupture teams just reduce Sunna's utility too much to not make her a viable choice over someone like Lucia, Pan Yanhu, Caesar, Astra, and even Yuzuha. But that's about it. Sadly, I won't be able to compare the performance of other DPS teams like how I did with Shunguang simply due to time restraints. With that, and doing hundreds of deadly assault runs for accurate comparisons in a very short amount of time is a very good way to make an angel go delusional. But anyway, make sure to tell me what you think about her in the comments below, and don't forget to hit me with a like and a sub. Now onto the showcase, and as usual, forgive my skill issue, I'm pretty terrible at this game due to my aging motor skills.